all in the shamily. Agrippina descended the stairs of her home with care. Our home, but not really our home. That was just the official line for others. Having just had a second hip surgery while smiling lovingly on the dozens of pictures of her dead parents affixed to the walls of the stairwell. One might say adorning, if one were being absurdly generous. Arriving, finally, at the bottom of the stairs, to the right of which sat a 110-year-old, altogether unplayable Steinway, scavenged by those very same dead parents at a school giveaway many years prior. Now it lay there, an evil, bloated monstrosity, with a toothy, malevolent grin, a sarcophagus full of useless hammers, pins, untunable strings, and a broken soundboard. But, and this is all that matters, brimming full of invented memories and fantastical idealizations of two poisonously pathological people who had set in motion the wheels of a process which had doomed their daughter to eternally suffocate in a series of residences swarming with unread books, photographs, certificates, knickknacks, keepsakes, and other various and sundry precious mementos. Oh yes, they were always described that way, as precious mementos, all of which had long ago turned the house into an unlivable landfill, crammed full of unreal, constructed memories, in which she bathed both herself and her daughter until the two of them were drowning in and choking on the poisonous fumes of this unspeakable, unholy pollution, until they were both so contaminated and submerged beneath them that any objectivity or self-awareness either of them might ever have possessed, given some other life scenario, had been snuffed out in the endless, unrelenting filth of those despicable, jealous ghosts, whose sole agenda was that neither of them ever have any agency or self, much less life, engulfed, as they were, are, and will forever be, in paying homage to these false and malevolent gods, in fear of life and of the living, and in the endless clutching of each to the other in a stark, unconscious dance, choreographed by those self-same spirits. All of it cruelly orchestrated to ensure that the daughter's future home, life, psyche, and capacity for meaningful introspection would also be as bathed in unconsciousness and ancestor worship as they had been, and are, for Agrippina. Enmeshment to the point of merging with one another, like that last shot in Bergman's Persona. Except that here, there was no real love, only a script being dutifully and unconsciously read and enacted by long ago gutted zombies. The poor daughter made a stab at independence and moved 2,000 miles away to live with some poor, clueless schmuck, but it was hopeless. There were 20 phone calls and texts daily back and forth between the two of them, even though she was purportedly living with this unfortunate fellow in what was described as a love relationship. A love relationship which undoubtedly resembled the one the mother pretended she was in for the benefit of her acquaintances, but actually one in which the husband was a pawn in a psychotic parlor game of reconstructing a past that had never occurred and was never allowed to be or accepted as a person in his own right, only a symbol, a figurehead, a wind-up doll whose designated job was to recreate countless memories in some demented hall of mirrors. And when he failed, which of course he was destined to and did, he became an inconsequential piece of trash, an object fit only for contempt, an irritating annoyance, someone to harangue, lambast, to insult, to abuse, and to subject to endless, nasty, undeserved criticisms. What was his sin? Oh, that's easy. He was unable to become a reliably obsequious and role-playing mannequin, made to order in the image of her imaginary father, who was, in actual fact, a prick, and a stand-in for a whole host of her other deranged projections and wishes to create her imaginary family of origin. His wishes, as one assumes, those of that father, mattered for nothing. Thus spake Agrippina.
We will have the Christmas my parents had. Your wishes count for nothing. You are to live as a simple prop and adornment in this nightmare asylum I have created, and never utter a word of protest, although you can barely walk through it, filled as it is with the useless detritus of hungry ghosts, who have shoved their agendas so far down my throat that I never had the slightest chance to have a clue who I once was or might have been. That's why I never had a real boyfriend before you. That's why, when I did have pretend boyfriends, they always lived 600 miles away. That's why I never lived with anyone, until I chanced upon a sucker as malleable and gullible as you, late in life. Yes, but thankfully not quite too late, and that's why I never, in 28 years, shared a bed with you. And that's also why I held my nose and acquiesced to fucking you for a year or two with those dreadful sad sack gazes of mine, until it became clear you couldn't give me what I wanted the normal way, what with my tangled up tubes and your pathetically low sperm count. But you did finally give me what I wanted, kicking and screaming all the way, but no matter. I dragged your sorry ass to what felt and looked like a third world IVF clinic, where you eventually jerked off into a cup, after great protest, and in spite of your better, saner, healthier instincts. I worked on you relentlessly, with Oscar-worthy performance after performance, until you capitulated and agreed to help me create my masterpiece, this mini-me, on whose indoctrination I am still hard at work, and for both me and her you have given up everything. Your life, your home, your career, your sanity. All to create a creature I have succeeded in making into myself, into whom I have poured one poisonous lie and suffocating fantasy after another, exactly as they were poured into me, and through whom I have succeeded in bringing this nightmare, this God-forsaken hell on earth, into the next generation. And since that time, you, needless to say, have become, at best, irrelevant, a stage prop, an inconsequential, forgettable knick-knack on a shelf, when you chose to behave in the clearly prescribed manner, but more often, simply an object of contempt. When you got cancer, lost your career and will to live because you'd been ripped from your previously more than satisfactory and nourishing life, these things mattered not in the slightest. That you tried to kill yourself twice, and that you got incredibly close to succeeding on both occasions, that was of absolutely no concern either. You jerked off like the good little obedient and traumatized boy for whom I had pegged you, as I predicted and knew you would, given all my consciously engineered false protestations of love and my guilt-inducing endless mindfucks. That was all I needed, and you finally gave it to me. You gave me her. And hence, you are now, for all intents and purposes, not even garbage. You could have salvaged some small place at the end of the table, which my daughter and I share, as a sort of quaint appendage, displayed occasionally to passers-by. Had you fulfilled your duty as a cardboard stand-in for the father I lost at 20 years old, the shitty, drunken, fourth-rate jazz musician, who merrily disinherited my sister when she displeased him, without a second thought, though he and I and the rest of my family did and do our damnedest to pretend he was some sort of saint. But you wouldn't, or couldn't. You went about your business studying things you wish to study, create things you wish to create. Do you recall when you began to play and study more classical music and less jazz? Do you recall what I said to you at that time? I told you that you had gotten me under false pretenses. In other words, that you'd previously given me reason to believe you had another arrow in your quiver, which might make my paternal projections more plausible, and were now withdrawing it. It's all so very simple. You see it clearly now, no? Worm? And so, needless to say, I claimed and continue to claim this child, this doll, this plaything as my own, to smother, suffocate, and condemn to live the life I have lived, alone, feeling constantly betrayed by everyone and everything other than my ersatz memories of my dead parents who have, and who continue to, smother and suffocate me from the grave, leaving me alone, friendless, bitter, isolated, and without a shred of curiosity or humor, although, granted, that may simply be constitutional, and without a single goal in life other than to be sure that my daughter follows in my footsteps. For she too is condemned to be friendless, bitter, isolated, and without a shred of curiosity or humor, for she was created for several, quite specific purposes. To parent me while I remain alive, and to idealize and worship me as a perverse, all-powerful totem when I am gone, as All the while, I shred her insides, potentials, and future to ribbons, and leave, upon my death, a wounded, bitter, lonely, friendless animal, incapable of either love or empathy, as I am, as my mother was. And when I no longer walk the earth, my demands will not be any less potent. Of this I could not be more certain. This is what I am, an emotionally Machiavellian monster who lives in a house which is, and which has always been, a fetid swamp, full of filth and overseen by vindictive poltergeists. A monster who ravenously consumes crap books and crap television to help distract her from her spiritual deadness and emptiness. A Lilliputian miscreant who has not the slightest feeling nor interest in art, literature, or music, and who brings only ugliness, cruelty, and grandiosity into the world. Am I to be considered guilty, then? Given that I was programmed to be this thing, this ugly, cruel, soul-destroying hag? That's a question for the philosophers. You sometimes busy yourself with philosophical matters. Torture yourself with that conundrum, painfully and eternally. For all I care, you are a worm, and nothing more, whose sufferings matter not.
My response, as your husband, and to even utter that word makes me want to puke, is that whether free will exists or not, you are frightfully guilty, and to be loathed and avoided at every opportunity, for there is no good in you, only bitterness, grasping, and the wish to make others as miserable as yourself. With your daughter, you have succeeded. Her life will clearly be dismal and hopelessly miserable. With your husband, you have mostly succeeded, although he only has himself to blame for not running away immediately, and 1,000 times afterwards, although he tried oh so many times. I knew, part of me knew, with perfect clarity, what you were. Did I, troubled as I was, ever try to kill myself with lethal intent prior to living in your scorpion's web of depravity and corruption? I did not, and would never have. You picked me for a mark, I'll give you that. You sniffed the unconscious of a deeply traumatized person who was sufficiently predisposed to being manipulated with lies, love bombs, and disingenuous promises, which you never even remotely meant, felt, intended, or believed. You wanted only ever to be a single mother, right from the get-go. The most that was ever really wanted or required of me was a sufficient quantity of sperm, and to be a sort of appendage you could abuse, drive to suicide, and whose money you could then more than likely spend in order to move within literal striking distance of your daughter, if she had the audacity to attempt to create a life further away from your venomous tentacles than walking distance. I rue the day I met you. It was the unluckiest day of my life, but the luckiest day of yours. For here was that piece of damaged, moistened clay for which you had been desperately searching, a piece of clay to mold and manipulate into doing your ungodly, diabolical bidding, you loathsome, depraved harpy, a piece of clay, stumbling, confused, duped, betrayed, abused, and then cast aside. A piece of clay which has now become fully man, a man who has awakened to the monumental, brutal nightmare to which he tragically acquiesced all those many dark and desperate years ago.